Hey, it's Apple from Apple Knows Channel, and today I'm about to take you into a world that sounds like pure Hollywood fiction, but every single story I'll share with you is a documented fact. These are real escapes from the police that left entire cities stunned, stories that seem impossible until you realize they actually happened. People have gone to unbelievable lengths to avoid the law, and some of these escapes sound so outrageous that if they were written in a movie script, producers would reject them as too unrealistic. Let's start with one of the most shocking police escapes ever recorded in the United States. In 1992, a prisoner named Richard Lee McNair managed to slip away not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. His most famous escape involved nothing but a roll of lip balm in his brain. He used chapstick to slip out of his handcuffs, crawl through a ventilation duct, and disappeared. Years later, while being transported from prison to a work detail, McNair sealed himself inside a mail bag full of packages. Guards loaded the bag onto a pallet of mail, and he was literally shipped out of prison. For hours, he lay still, breathing through a tiny hole he had cut, until he finally cut his way out once the coast was clear. What's almost unbelievable is that during his time on the run, he was once stopped by police for questioning. He calmly talked his way out of it, gave a fake name, and was let go. Imagine the nerve it takes to stare a police officer in the eyes, knowing your face is on wanted posters, and still walk away free. Another case that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a fast-paced chase movie happened in Canada in 2013. Two men, Yves Dennis and Serge Pomerleau, escaped a high-security prison in Quebec using a helicopter. Yes, a real helicopter. Accomplices hijacked a civilian chopper, landed it directly in the prison yard, and whisked the inmates into the sky before guards even knew what was happening. It was the second helicopter escape in Quebec within just a few months. What makes it even crazier is that this wasn't the first time criminals around the world used helicopters for breakouts. In France, a gangster named Pascal Payet escaped prison the same way twice. His second helicopter escape happened on Bastille Day, which is basically France's Independence Day, when security should have been at its highest. He later helped other prisoners escape the same way, turning himself into a legend of jailbreak history. But maybe the most mind-bending story comes from Australia in 1999, when a man named John Killick escaped from a maximum security prison in Sydney in broad daylight. His girlfriend hijacked a helicopter at gunpoint and forced the pilot to land inside the prison walls. Killick ran to the helicopter, jumped in, and they flew away as hundreds of inmates cheered from the ground. The couple stayed on the run for 6 weeks before finally being caught. What shocks experts to this day is how many helicopter escapes worldwide were successful before prisons finally redesigned their security to block airspace. And then there are escapes that didn't rely on helicopters or hiding in mailbags but pure human determination. One famous story is Frank Abagnale, the con artist made famous by the movie Catch Me If You Can. While the film dramatized much of his life, one fact remains true: he escaped custody twice. Once, he impersonated an undercover prison inspector, convinced guards he was there to check on security, and simply walked out the front door. Imagine having so much confidence that guards actually help you escape because they believe you're in charge. These aren't just strange tales, they expose how unpredictable human ingenuity can be when someone is desperate to run. Every time you think you've heard the most insane police escape ever, there's always another story even harder to believe. If you thought helicopters and lip balm were wild, wait until you hear about a prison break in Greece in 2009. 2 inmates, including a notorious bank robber named Vasilis Paleokostas, escaped in the most surreal way possible. Guess how? A helicopter swooped in, dropped down a rope ladder, and picked them up while guards stood in disbelief. The craziest part is that this was the second time Paleokostas had escaped using a helicopter. He had already pulled off the exact same trick in 2006, and authorities swore it could never happen again. And yet, just 3 years later, it happened again in the very same prison. To this day, Paleokostas has never been recaptured. He's often called the Greek Robin Hood because he allegedly gave money to the poor, which makes his escape stories almost mythical. But some escapes don't happen in the air, they happen underground. In 2015, the world was stunned when Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the infamous Mexican drug lord, vanished from his maximum security cell. Cameras recorded him pacing back and forth, then suddenly disappearing through a hole in his shower floor. What authorities discovered was a mile-long tunnel, full fully lit, ventilated, and even equipped with a motorcycle mounted on rails for fast transport. It took engineers months to construct without detection, and when the tunnel was revealed, it shocked global security experts. This wasn't just an escape, it was an underground engineering masterpiece built right under the noses of one of the most secure prisons in Mexico. Then there's the 1962 Alcatraz escape, which is still debated today. Frank Morrison brothers John and Clarence Anglin managed to carve holes through their cell walls using makeshift tools like spoons and a drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor. They built a raft and life vests out of raincoats, then disappeared into the San Francisco Bay. Officially, the FBI declared they likely drowned. But decades later, investigators received possible evidence suggesting the Anglin brothers might have survived and lived quietly in South America. The mystery remains one of the most captivating unsolved escape stories of all time, and every year, researchers still debate whether the men made it to freedom. And sometimes, escapes don't require tunnels or helicopters, just sheer audacity. In 2006, in Texas, a prisoner named James escaped a courthouse by simply walking out dressed in a stolen judge's robe. He blended in with lawyers and staff, strolled through the front doors, and was gone before anyone noticed. Imagine the boldness it takes to pull that off, knowing that one wrong move means instant capture. Each of these escapes has one thing in common: they defy belief. They show how even the most secure systems can be outsmarted when someone has enough time, desperation, and courage. And the more you dig, the more stories you find that make you question just how unbreakable maximum security really is. Some escapes are so strange that even seasoned officers admitted they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Take for example a case from Germany in 2009, where a 19-year-old woman walked into a prison to visit her boyfriend. Sounds normal, right? Except she smuggled in a rope, pepper spray, and 2 pistols hidden in her handbag. Once inside, she pulled the weapons, overpowered the guards, and freed her boyfriend right there in front of everyone. The two sprinted out of the prison, hijacked a car, and led police on a massive manhunt. They managed to stay free for several days before finally being tracked down. What shocked investigators wasn't just the brazen nature of the escape but how a teenager managed to fool security so easily and turn a casual visit into a Hollywood-style jailbreak. Then there's the story from Japan, a country known for its strict discipline and tight prison systems. In 2018, a man named Tatsuma Hiro managed to escape from a low-security prison on an island. He spent 23 days on the run, stealing bicycles and living off scraps. Police launched one of the largest manhunts in recent Japanese history, deploying drones, helicopters, and thousands of officers. Despite all this, Hiro managed to evade capture by hiding in plain sight, blending into crowded neighborhoods and acting like an ordinary citizen. He was finally caught after traveling more than 60 miles across the country. The escape embarrassed Japanese authorities so much that they promised to overhaul prison security nationwide. And if you thought blending in was bold, wait until you hear about one of the most audacious disguises ever used. In Brazil, 2019, a gang leader named Clovino da Silva attempted to escape prison dressed as his own daughter. He wore a wig, a silicone mask, tight jeans, and a pink t-shirt, hoping to simply walk out the front door during visiting hours. The disguise was so detailed that guards said at first glance it actually looked convincing. But when he grew nervous and started acting strangely, they caught him. Authorities filmed the moment he removed the mask, and the footage went viral worldwide. It remains one of the most bizarre escape attempts ever recorded. Of course, not all escapes are about costumes or helicopters, sometimes it's pure daring speed. In 2012, in the UK, 2 inmates cut through prison bars and scaled the walls using nothing but bedsheets tied together. Security cameras captured them sprinting across the roof before disappearing into the night. It was a throwback to old-school escape methods, yet it worked, leaving guards scrambling in disbelief. What these escapes prove is that no matter how advanced security gets, human creativity always finds a loophole. And when desperation mixes with imagination, the results are often stranger than fiction. And now we're stepping into the level of escapes that not only shocked the public but forced entire countries to rethink what secure really means. These aren't just clever tricks, they're escapes that embarrassed governments, humiliated prison officials, and left the world shaking its head in disbelief. One of the most jaw-dropping stories comes from France in 2018, when notorious gangster Redoin Fade pulled off a prison break straight out of a blockbuster film. Armed men hijacked a helicopter, flew it into the courtyard of Roe prison near Paris, and extracted Fade in broad daylight. The entire escape took less than 10 minutes. Guards couldn't even fire back because the attackers used smoke bombs and power tools to cut through prison barriers. Fade, who was known as a master of disguise and an expert in armored car robberies, vanished without a trace for months. When police finally caught him, they admitted the escape had been executed with military-level precision. But not every escape relied on helicopters or elaborate plans. Sometimes it was about exploiting tiny details. In 2015, in New York, two convicted murderers, Richard Matt and David Sweat, used power tools to cut through cell walls at Clinton Correctional Facility. The tools were smuggled in by a prison employee who had been manipulated into helping them. The men crawled through a complex system of pipes and tunnels, emerging from a manhole outside the prison. The escape sparked one of the biggest manhunts in New York history, involving thousands of officers, helicopters, and even thermal imaging. Matt was killed in a shootout 3 weeks later, while Sweat was captured alive just 2 days after that. The scandal revealed shocking corruption and negligence inside the prison system. And then there's the escape that literally rewrote British prison history. In 1966, the infamous train robber Ronnie Biggs escaped from Wandsworth Prison by scaling a wall with a rope ladder thrown over by accomplices. He was whisked away in a waiting van and spent decades on the run, living in places like Brazil and Australia. For years he taunted British authorities, even giving interviews while technically a fugitive. His escape became so legendary that he turned into a kind of outlaw celebrity, proving how some escapes live on in culture long after the chase is over. Here's one that sounds completely surreal. In 1971, a convict in Canada named Billy Hayes managed to escape a prison in Turkey by simply disguising himself as a woman. He wore makeup, stole a dress, and walked right out during visiting hours. While this story later inspired the famous movie Midnight Express, the real events were just as incredible. It showed how sometimes the simplest methods, just confidence and a disguise, could succeed where complex plans might fail. What ties all of these together is the shock factor. Entire governments, thousands of officers, millions of dollars in security, all undone by a disguise, a helicopter, or a smuggled tool. And every time, the public is left asking the same question: if even the most secure prisons can be beaten, is there truly such a thing as escape-proof? Now we're diving into the kind of escapes that sound like tall tales passed around in bars, but every one of these is backed by real records. These are the escapes so bizarre that when they hit the headlines, people thought they were jokes. Take Willie Sutton, one of America's most famous bank robbers in the early 20th century. He was called Slick Willie for a reason. He escaped custody 3 times. His most audacious escape happened in 1932 when he and several other inmates dressed as prison guards and simply walked out of New York's Sing Sing prison. Yes, they stole uniforms, put them on, and blended in so well that actual guards helped them through the gates. What's even crazier is that after his final capture years later, Sutton became a minor celebrity, even appearing in ads for banks teaching people about security. Imagine that banks hired the man who once robbed them to promote safety. Another escape that defies belief took place in Argentina in 2015. 3 high-profile criminals cut through their cell bars and disappeared into the night. But when investigators searched the prison, they discovered a massive underground tunnel that had been dug for months. It was equipped with lights, ventilation, and even rudimentary rail tracks to transport dirt. The engineering was so advanced that police compared it to a mining operation. Locals joked that it was less a prison escape and more like the construction of a subway system. But not every jaw-dropping escape comes from a hardened gangster. In 2006, a teenager named Ashley Smith managed to break a friend out of a courthouse in Canada by threatening guards with a fake gun. The gun? It wasn't even real, it was carved from soap and painted black. The level of bluffing and bravery it took shocked the country, and the case became a national controversy over youth crime and prison security. One of the most cinematic escapes in history happened in South Korea in 2012, when a man known as the Korean Houdini, Choi Gap-bok, slipped out of his prison cell using only his yoga skills. Guards said he applied lotion to his body and wriggled through the food slot in his cell door, a gap only 5.9 inches wide. He had trained his body for years, and when the moment came, he literally squeezed himself into freedom. Authorities were so embarrassed that they immediately redesigned cell doors nationwide to make sure no one could ever try that again. And sometimes, escapes don't even involve leaving the prison grounds. In 1980, in California, a group of inmates at San Quentin Prison constructed an actual hot air balloon from stolen materials, plastic bags, raincoats, and smuggled propane. They attempted to launch it from the prison yard, and though the plan ultimately failed, the fact that a balloon was assembled inside one of the most notorious prisons in America became legendary. Guards admitted they were stunned that no one noticed the construction. When you hear stories like these, it almost feels like reality is stranger than any movie. From soap guns to yoga escapes, from tunnels with railroads to hot air balloons, these breakouts prove there's no limit to human imagination when freedom is on the line. We're stepping into escapes so outrageous they didn't just make headlines, they forced entire countries to rip apart their prison systems and start over. These are the stories that made governments panic, because they showed just how fragile maximum security really was. Let's go back to 1983 in Northern Ireland, where the Mace prison witnessed one of the largest prison escapes in modern history. 38 prisoners, all members of the IRA, overpowered guards with smuggled guns and knives. They hijacked a food truck, rammed through the prison gates, and scattered into the countryside. It was chaos. One guard was killed, dozens were injured, and the escape shook the British government to its core. The maze had been considered escape-proof, yet in one afternoon, nearly 40 men proved otherwise. To this day, it remains one of the biggest mass escapes from a European prison. Now shift to Texas, year 2000, the infamous Texas 7. 7 inmates, all convicted of violent crimes, managed to break out of the Connolly unit by overpowering civilian employees and guards. They stole clothes, weapons, and even a prison truck, driving right out of the gates. For weeks they carried out a crime spree across the state, including a high-profile robbery where they killed a police officer. The manhunt was massive, involving the FBI and U.S. Marshals. Eventually, 6 were captured, 1 committed suicide, but the escape was so notorious it directly influenced how maximum security prisons in America tightened every single protocol. Then there's the story from Denmark in 2019 that stunned Europe. A well-known gangster named Nedim Yassar was shot dead after leaving a radio station, but that same year, another Danish gangster pulled off a jaw-dropping escape. He was smuggled out of prison during a dental visit when masked gunmen stormed the facility, shot their way in, and freed him in broad daylight. It wasn't just a prison break, it was a military-style assault in the middle of a peaceful Scandinavian country, and it left the public questioning how safe their justice system really was. We can't leave out Mexico again, because their escape stories read like novels. In 2012, more than 130 inmates escaped from a prison in Piedras Negras by walking out through a tunnel dug directly under the prison. Officials later admitted the tunnel had been under construction for months, and the scale of the operation was staggering. Authorities tried to downplay it, but the escape was so big that it sparked suspicions of corruption at every level. And perhaps one of the strangest escape attempts ever recorded took place in Moscow in 1995. A prisoner named Alexander Solonik, nicknamed the Macedonian, who was one of Russia's most feared hitmen, managed to climb out of his maximum security cell using nothing but makeshift ropes. Guards later admitted that Solonik had bribed prison staff, and his escape was a mix of athletic ability and systemic corruption. He remained on the run for years, becoming a legend in the Russian underworld. Each of these escapes forced massive changes, new laws, tighter restrictions, redesigned prisons. But no matter how many billions are poured into security, history keeps proving that if someone is desperate enough, there's always a way out. We're moving into the escapes that baffle experts to this very day, the ones where even after investigations, people are still left wondering, how is that even possible? These aren't just breakouts, they're mysteries wrapped in chaos. Let's start in 1962 with the infamous escape from Mexico City's Lecumberri prison. 3 men managed to tunnel out of what was known as the Black Palace, a fortress-like prison where escapes were said to be impossible. Their tunnel was nearly 150 feet long, dug over months with crude tools and hidden dirt disposal systems. The men vanished into the city, and to this day, nobody knows for certain if they lived normal lives afterward or fell into cartel hands. What's shocking is that the tunnel was dug right under the noses of guards in one of the harshest prisons in Latin America. Jump to 1980, Peru. El Fronten prison, sitting on a rocky island in the Pacific. One night, over 135 inmates, most of them linked to political movements, carried out a coordinated escape using boats and makeshift rafts. Authorities only realized what happened hours later when guards did a headcount. The fact that so many slipped away from an island prison, something usually reserved for movie plots, was a national embarrassment. And then there's South America's most mind-boggling case. In 2020, 75 prisoners escaped from Paraguay's Pedro Juan Caballero prison. They didn't just tunnel out, they dug a massive underground corridor, fully reinforced, with lights installed inside. But here's where it gets suspicious. Investigators later discovered that many of the prisoners had simply walked out the front gate, using the tunnel as a cover story. This led to the arrest of more than 30 prison staff for collusion. It showed how sometimes the wildest escape plans aren't about genius, but about corruption so deep it turns security into a joke. One escape that still gets studied happened in 1947 at Alcatraz, years before the more famous Anglin brothers. An inmate named Bernard Coy managed to starve himself to slip through prison bars. Yes, he literally lost weight intentionally until his body was thin enough to squeeze through. He and several others then climbed the gun gallery, overpowered a guard, and armed themselves. Although their larger plan failed and they were killed or recaptured, Coy's method is still talked about because of how extreme it was, weaponizing his own body just to fit through steel bars. And sometimes the most shocking escapes happen not in prisons, but during transport. In 2018, in France, armed men ambushed a prison van carrying Redouane Fade, the same gangster who had earlier escaped with a helicopter. His transport convoy was rammed, doors blown open with power tools, and Fade was freed in seconds. It was a scene straight out of an action film, complete with assault rifles and smoke grenades, and it exposed just how vulnerable prisoner transport really is, even in developed nations. Each of these escapes left experts scratching their heads, rewriting protocols, and sometimes even questioning whether their own officers were secretly in on it. They blur the line between raw ingenuity and inside help, making us wonder if any prison is truly secure. Apple here from Apple Knows channel, and now that we've reached the end of this journey, one thing is clear: reality can be stranger than any crime thriller. From helicopters swooping into courtyards to tunnels carved with near-engineering precision, from disguises that fooled guards to escapes that humiliated entire governments, these stories prove that desperation and ingenuity can bend the limits of what seems possible. But beyond the shock and fascination, these escapes left deep marks on history. They forced nations to rewrite security laws, redesign prisons, and rethink how they guard their most dangerous criminals. Some escapees were caught quickly, others lived for decades in freedom, and a few vanished so completely that their fates remain unsolved mysteries to this day. The lesson is simple: no system is perfect, no wall is unbreakable, and no plan is truly escape-proof. That's why these stories continue to capture imaginations, because they reveal just how unpredictable humans can be when the will to be free collides with the structures meant to contain them. This was Apple from Apple Knows channel. Thank you for staying with me through this wild exploration of escapes so unbelievable, yet so real. They prove once again that truth is often stranger than fiction. Until next time, stay curious.